All right, welcome back, everybody. Here we are again, the 52 Ways podcast. My name is Scott Milford.
And I'm Christian
You have a last name?
Milford.
Christian Milford, that's right. And we're excited to bring week 3 or episode 3 here to you as we go through this process of trying to figure out how did Jesus love others when he was here on earth, and what can we take from the example that he set so that we can love others the way that he loved us, like he told us to. Pretty simple, right?
Yep.
All right. So last time I went into a big, long explanation on that, but I'm not going to go into a whole lot more than that. You think the people got it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. He's a man of few words today. So the reason that this is so important is because we live in a messed up, politically divided world. And I think it breaks the heart of God. And his whole purpose, so a big part of his purpose for the way Jesus set this example was so that we as Christians, as followers, as his children, we could love his people on this earth and be his hands and feet since Jesus is no longer here on the earth. But I think we've not done a very good job of that lately as the Christian church. And so really excited and passionate about what we're doing here in this podcast to go through very methodically week after week after week after week after week after week after week.
Say that another 48 times.
Yeah, we've got a long ways to go. But pick out 52 ways that Jesus loved people and talk about it and figure out how it applies to our lives. And so far, we've talked about a couple of really key things. What did we do in week 1? We talked about the idea of helping people see the value that God sees in them by picking them, kind of like picking teams for kickball or softball. Jesus picked fishermen to be his ministry team. And then what did we talk about in episode 2? Do you remember? On the spot?
Yeah. No, I forgot.
You forgot. That's all right. Yeah.
So we're supposed to love each other.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we talked about the fact that Jesus healed them all.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was your Sunday school answer. We're supposed to love each other. That's the whole point.
Yep.
But no, we talked about how Jesus, in this time where he healed people, he healed them all. And we drew a Kurt Warner comparison where he signed all the autographs, and how it's important for us to give ourselves, to give time, to give our talents to people who may need it. And even when it's a sacrifice for us to do so. So this week, we're going to continue through the book of Matthew, and we're just looking kind of chapter by chapter, verse by verse at the times that Jesus showed love for people. And this is one that's a little different, where we get to a place where he was teaching. And a lot of the work that he did to show us how to love it's through his actions, but there's also a lot of examples we'll pull out where it's through his teaching. And so this one is huge. It's from Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12. And we know it as Christians, we know it as the Beatitudes. Did you even know what Beatitudes was? Like that word, the definition?
Yeah, actually I had to memorize these whenever I was a kid.
No, not like what the list is, but what the word beatitude means.
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. So I looked it up, and paraphrasing, it basically means it's a set of religious actions or phrases or ideals. You good? There we go. It's a set of like religious phrases or actions or ideals. And but it has this other context around it, which I think is really cool, where it's goodness, it's wholesomeness, it's blessedness. It even was described as things that are like warm and fuzzy, which I think definitely plays into, the idea that we're trying to talk about loving one another here. So, Jesus, it wasn't just a bunch of rules he was spitting out. It was really heartfelt, compassionate things that he was teaching us through these things that we call the Beatitudes. So it's the way that it's introduced in chapter 5, verse 1. It just says, one day as Jesus saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and he sat down. It's interesting that Matthew included the fact that he sat down. His disciples gathered around him, along with all the people that were gathering as the crowd, and he began to teach them. So the timing of this is interesting. Why do you think the timing of this is interesting?
Wasn't it right before he healed all these people?
Well, it was right after.
Oh, but yeah.
Well,
right
in sequence
after, yeah.
in Matthew, anyway, it was right after he healed all these people. So Jesus had a lot of influence in this moment. He was beloved because he had just healed all of these loved ones of people, whether they were Jews or heathens or pagans or whoever they might have been. Jesus just healed all these people. And so he's got a captive audience.
Maybe that's why he healed all of them.
Maybe, yeah. Wow. Say that again.
Maybe that's why he healed all of them.
That might be. See, he always has a purpose for all these things that he does. And oh man, somebody just tried calling me right in the middle of the show here. Hopefully it didn't mess up the recording. All right. So Jesus had a purpose for healing all those people, and it was to help gather this crowd. I think we'll just go with that. I think that works. So he didn't choose to teach them like hardcore, you're going to go to hell kind of stuff. He chose to teach some of the most heartfelt, tender, compassion-filled elements of what he brings to the world. So let's just use a couple of these. We don't have time in this to go through all these in a lot of detail, but the first one is this: God blesses those who are poor and realizes their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And a lot of times I hear this phrase, poor in spirit. So it's not really always just like they're financially poor, but it's those who are poor in spirit. I hear it said that way a lot. I think other translations actually have that word in there. But he says those people will inherit, or the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Then he goes on to say, God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. So humility is a theme here that he is pulling out as being important. Those who are humble. I think that's significant. There's part of me that wishes one of the fruits of the Spirit was humility.
Yeah.
But the fact that Jesus said it here, I think that maybe we can add it to a list like that without too much hesitation. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice. What do you think about that one?
You don't see a lot of that nowadays, right?
Well, I don't know. I might disagree with you on that. I think this one is a slippery slope. This is one where I think we do want justice.
But it's our own version of justice.
Oh, okay. It's our own version of justice. I think you're right.
Because our version of justice is maybe different than God's version of justice.
Yeah, our version of justice is very bloodthirsty.
Yeah, revenge.
Revenge. Yeah, gosh, well, maybe that's a whole other study, is what is Jesus's version of justice? What does that look like versus our messed up version of it? God blesses those who are merciful. So now we're getting into, even more of these, so the idea of forgiveness and gentleness and, mercy. When you give mercy to somebody, that is, what is it? Not giving them a punishment.
It's like the opposite of grace.
Yeah, they're both good though.
Yeah,
I think mercy is giving somebody something that they don't deserve.
And then grace is not giving someone something that they do deserve.
Yeah, like a bad thing that they do deserve. Maybe we have those opposite.
We might. They're both Jesus words.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if they're opposite, because the point is we understand both concepts. But yeah, so the merciful, they will be shown mercy, he says. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. And you know what? I used to be in a show in Branson called The Promise. And I remember this part of the show. I was one of the disciples during this part of the show. And I remember the guy that played Jesus, Randy Brooks was his name. And he went through all this with us as the disciples, and we were reacting to everything that he said. And I remember when he said, whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. And we all see God, they'll see God. Like we had this big reaction. I just remember how neat that was. And every night I got to hear this preached by this guy who really did look like Jesus quite a bit, at least what we think of Jesus as looking like. But these words are just kind of grilled into my brain, but whose hearts are pure. I don't know if any of us ever get to the place where our hearts are pure.
Nope. We will always try to become pure, but we never will.
Well, but I think we become pure through Jesus washing us clean.
Once we die.
Once we die, and that's when we will see God. We can't see God until then. Okay, we better keep going. God blesses those who work for peace, So again, as we get into this idea of loving one another the way that Jesus loved us, a couple of themes that have already come out. So humility is a big one that's already come out. Merciful, justice. We don't fully feel like we understand what it means for what his brand of justice is, but justice. And then peace he brings in, and a pure heart. And then finally, God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. So persecuted for doing right. How does that fit into this? I'm thinking about it here myself. How does that fit into this?
Like being a martyr, or like whenever you're doing things that are for God, people say that. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, I think that's it. But I think it goes beyond the idea of like what we might immediately think of with that, where it's like, oh, they're doing something against God, we're going to stand up for it. And so that's what he means here. I think it could also mean what he says, doing right, meaning being merciful, meaning being humble, meaning working for peace, which is all part of what he's taught here. And it's interesting that he used this persecuted for doing right as the last one.
Yeah. So he's like, okay, if you do all these things,
get a little closer to the
if
mic.
you do all these things, then the kingdom of heaven will be yours.
Yeah. I think that's what he's saying. He's putting a big old exclamation point on it. And again, he's teaching us how to love others the way that he loved us. And we could, just the way that we're applying the fruits of the Spirit to each of these teachings, we could probably also apply a filter to it where we apply humility and mercy and working for peace and having a pure heart. We could probably apply those things to all these actions of Jesus as well.
Definitely.
So the final couple of verses here I think are important. Verse 11 says, God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. But be happy about it, he said. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Go ahead.
So I think that's kind of like a way to show that you are doing what you're supposed to do, because you're like, how do I know whether I'm doing what God wants us to do? Well, if people are persecuting you, then you're probably in the right direction.
Yeah.
What God's saying.
Yeah. Do you think the people that are persecuting you are always the non-Christians?
Definitely not.
No, I think it probably usually is.
Yeah.
And that's the conventional
like
thinking.
People who claim to be Christians and kind of like the Pharisees.
Yeah. I'll be honest, there's times when I feel like my thinking about a situation runs a little contrary to the way a lot of Christians thinking about a situation runs. And there's times where I feel persecuted by Christians.
Really?
Yeah. And let me use the example. So verse 11 there says, when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things. I mean, right now, the Christian world oftentimes is mocked, is, lied about, and people say a lot of really ugly things about Christendom.
Yeah, normally they look at a Christian and they say, this person did something bad to me. And if they did, then they kind of have a part to whole fallacy where they say that since this one person's bad, then all of them are.
Yeah. Yeah. They apply.
So that's why God wants us to be so kind to everybody. So then they will use that fallacy and make that assumption that all Christians are nice.
That's good. That's good. And I think with where we are politically right now, where we are with COVID right now, I mean, let's face it, it's a lot of the Christians who are not getting vaccinated, a lot of the Christians that are not wearing masks. And I think in part, we are kind of getting a label on us, especially the evangelical side of Christianity. We're getting a label on us as not caring about others because we're not doing those things.
Yeah, they often generalize people in that category.
Yeah. And on one hand, I kind of get where they're coming from, but what I don't love, and this is where I feel like I'm maybe in the minority among Christians, what I don't love is the venom and the almost hatred that I see being spewed from Christians to the people who are persecuting the Christians. And I think it's clear by this teaching and so many other teachings of Jesus that our job is not to throw hatred back at them. Our job is to be merciful. Our job is to be working for peace. Our job is to have pure hearts. That's what Jesus, to be humble. That's what Jesus called us to do, not to try to prove all the people who disagree with us on topics like that or anything, try to prove them wrong. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
You see it?
Yeah, I see it.
And that I don't think most people see it. So all of you listening here, man, I would just really challenge you to prayerfully examine your heart. Where are you in that? You know, can you see through the stress that comes when somebody is persecuting you and you have this instinct to fight back?
Yeah.
Can you be merciful?
Yeah, just love through your differences with people. That's what I've come to realize, is that you may have differences and you think that it's a big, and it might be big, but just always be their friend. And
yeah, that's good. And I think if you can keep the mantra, and this, I didn't coin this phrase, I forget if it was Andy Stanley or Pete Wilson that did, but do you want to build a bridge or do you want to be right? Or maybe a good way to say it is, are you building a bridge or are you trying to be right? And if you find that you're trying to be right more than you're trying to build a bridge, then I think that's a sign that you all too often are not doing, you're not loving others the way that Jesus set an example for us to do. So we don't have much time here because I think our phones are both about to die. So let's hit a couple of the fruits of the Spirit that tie into this, and then we will wrap up here rather quickly. What I had down was peace and faithfulness. So peace being one of the Beatitudes, one of the things that Jesus said, to try and exercise or insert peace, or at least a pursuit of peace into every interaction and into everything that you do, especially as it relates to dealing with people. And then faithfulness, because in doing these things that Jesus is teaching us in the Sermon on the Mount here, in doing these things, he's being faithful to his Father who sent him here on a mission to represent, you know, the triune God, you know, what's wrong with me? I can't think of the three in one.
the Trinity.
The Trinity. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I couldn't spit the word Trinity out. But he was here to represent that and to do so faithfully. And despite being fully human, he successfully does that. So I think those are the two ties to the fruit of the Spirit, for us to be faithful to God in all that we do and to use this idea of peace. Less argumentative and more bridge building, I think, is what Jesus is trying to help us see here. And then as far as how this works into our regular lives, I think we've touched on that pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about COVID, but there's so many other topics out there. I mean, abortion is another one. I mean, you want to get some Christians riled up. You talk about abortion and you have got some riled up Christians immediately. And I just wonder, is there a way that we can talk about extremely controversial, hurtful, painful topics like that without coming across ugly, without coming across venomous, and the opposite of what the Beatitudes tell us, to have no mercy? You know, I love watching Karate Kid where he talks about no mercy, no mercy, sir. And I think Christians come across that way because we just come across as ugly. And we have, I think in some cases, rightfully earned the reputation of being unloving, being without mercy, not being full of grace, being full of salt rather than being full of grace. We've earned that reputation in a lot of situations, and we got to turn that around.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things is with going back to abortion, is that there's a difference between being objectively rude about things and riled up about things. So like let's say I'm for abortion, or I'm against abortion, you're for abortion, I say, hey, you're a horrible person. And that's being objectively like rude. It's like, okay, everybody's going to take that as being mad. But if I come across to you and I say something that is less rude than like that, and you take that as a defense, that's actually not on my fault. because it is how you're taking it, because you take certain things that normally are not rude and you take them as being rude.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. There's a lot of subjectivity to what you just said, because everybody has a different sort of bar for where objectivity ends and rudeness begins. Some people have very thin skin and they interpret everything as rudeness very quickly. Other people have thick skin and it's like way over here is where they start interpreting it as being rude. And I think that's where, as Christians, it's not easy. Like this, what we're talking about here is one of the hardest things about being a Christian. And we have to constantly be aware of how the conversation's going and how we're being interpreted. And if it's interpreted as if us not having mercy and having no grace and all those things, then I think in that moment we have to readjust and take on a little different approach. We still need to be upfront about what's right and what's wrong. But I think there's a way to do that and show compassion at the same time. Don't ask me exactly how to do that in every situation, because I'll fail 9 times out of 10. But I think that that's what Jesus was able to pull off so well.
Yeah.
And our pursuit is to be able to do it as much like him as we possibly can. So just remember, if you're a believer, people know you're a believer, you are representing Jesus in everything that you do. And he's showing us here, he's telling us here in the Beatitudes exactly how to represent him. So hope all of us can take that to heart. And next time we're in a tough conversation or we have an opportunity to show compassion, peace, have a pure heart, show humility, show mercy, I pray that we all will simply make the choice to do that and not let the emotions of feeling persecuted, feeling put on the spot, just put that behind you. That's of secondary importance compared to how important it is for that person that you're working with to see Christ in you. That's more important. All right. Let's end it there.
Okay.
Until next week, we're going to continue the pursuit to change the world by helping everybody figure out how to love one another the way that Jesus loved us. So until next week, be well, my friends.